Hello there, vinyl community. Just got home and had some dinner. Thought I'd come up and try to make a quick video while the mood struck. So, by the mid 1970s, um, Detroit was in a difficult way. The peak years of the auto industry had already happened, and we were already seeing the decline, job loss, crime was on the rise, and Detroit became known as the murder capital. Um, some people embraced that moniker, and some didn't. But a lot of people, working class community, a lot of people embraced it because why not? If people are going to label us with that, then why shouldn't we? And the truth is that there was crime in the city. Um, uh, the business community had largely abandoned, and the auto industry was doing the same. By the 70s, there was a new mayor, Coleman Young, uh, Detroit's first African American mayor. Good man, and he did what he could, but you couldn't do everything. He was up against some pretty um, big obstacles, not the least of which was out and out overt racism from the surrounding suburbs, which were largely white. And right in the midst of that, there was a revival of, and not just a revival, but kind of a new sound kind of emerging out of that whole, that whole thing. And people in the neighborhood started finding their own way and finding their own music. And out of all that was born a guy, Lyman Woodward, um, and what eventually became known. It started off as the Lyman Woodward Trio, and and they did some local live recordings, and eventually it became the Lyman Woodward Organization, and they did this pretty famous record. Now, this is not an original. I actually owned an original for a while. They're on Strata, and they're not easy to find. But in the 2000s, Wax Poetic. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. There used to be this fantastic publication called Wax Poetic. It was like primarily hip hop, but they did just a lot of great music, and they would do these extensive overviews of people. Just probably one of the best music publications I've ever read. And whenever I see these in the wild, sometimes you'll see them at stores. I grab them right away because they just are full of great reference information. But the Saturday Night Special, as it became known, the original that I had, this is a notoriously, this is soul jazz. This is funky soul jazz music at its best. Really, and the Detroit sound was separate than soul jazz that you'll find in other parts of the country. It was rootsier and it was funkier, and it was more street. Is probably a good way of putting it. And this album cover, as a matter of fact, they told Woodward to empty his pockets, and and it's said that this is what he pulled out of his pockets, and they took a photo of it and made that the album cover. I've also heard that that was a little bit of a not true story, but one I one I like to believe. But the names of the songs really capture something about Detroit. Joy Road, which is an intersection here in the Detroit area. Belle Isle Days. Belle Isle is a beautiful island off of the Detroit River, and in the summer times, it's just filled with people and kids out barbecuing and having a great time. And the nice thing about it was that it hadn't yet been sold to a private organization, and so nobody could keep people off of the island. Anyone could go there, no matter um, whether you were wealthy or not wealthy. People could go there, and to see that all unfold on hot summer days in August and July, um, it was a real special place. And this album, I think, captures a lot of that vibe. It kind of like you're down but not out, and despite what other people think of us, we're going to keep moving forward, and we're going to keep making great music. And so this album became, eventually over time, became pretty well known. The original that I had, not to digress to that, but was really noisy. And I did some research into it, and I found that the originals of this were notoriously um, noisy. And I remember listening to it for the very first time, and it was so noticeable. I'd never had a recording that the surface noise was that noticeable. And people, well, clean it. It wasn't an issue of cleaning it. It was the way the record was made. And then later I had a chance to, so Wax Poetic did a reissue of this. I think they did 1500. And cleaned up some of that background noise. Now, normally I know people will have like a problem with that, and they'll say, "Oh, you shouldn't tamper with the recording and try to clean it up." And I've heard both of them next to each other, and this was such an obviously better sounding record that even though I'm always inclined to go with originals, this was one that I just had to go with the reissue that they did. And plus I liked Wax Poetic a lot and kind of wanted to support their endeavor. But and then I sold my original for good money because it was on Strata, and it wasn't in that great a shape anyway. So this was a real upgrade. Since then, I've noticed that there's a new reissue of this, and I just saw it in the local shop. I have no idea what it sounds like, but it's nice to know that this album is in print and you can get a hold of. If you haven't heard it, you're in for a treat. This is, if you like, funky, soulful, earthy, street smart kind of music with that kind of vibe, Latin, Afro-Latin vibe, um, um, with the organ, and it's everything that so many times you hear music described as soul jazz, and I like that term, and I get this image in my head of what the music's going to sound like, and then I hear it, and it's um, a little too commercial, not greasy enough, not earthy enough for me, and but this has everything that you'd want. So that came out in '75, and it's a great record, classic. And then in '79, they did another great record, a live record. And this is it. And this is, honestly, I probably pull this out more often than I do Saturday Night Special. Don't Stop the Groove, which is the opening track on here, is fantastic. This album was recorded live at Cobb's Corner in Detroit, and it's low down, funky, 1979. Keep in mind that Detroit was really, by then, '79, the auto industry was on the skids, and lots of job loss, lots of dashed hopes, lots of people losing their homes, and in a city that had previously, flourished, just disintegrated. And on top of that, there was major issues of the city never really recovered from the riots of '68, and nobody ever came to fix all the damage that had been done in the riots. So you had this blight on top of blight problem, and flowering out of that, in the middle of that, was this soul jazz scene. Um, on top of that, you also had Detroit techno music, but that's another story that we'll save for another video. But this is one I think that not as many people know about, and these are great records. It's a pretty tough record to find. Now that there's a reissue of Saturday Night Special, you shouldn't have too much of a problem getting that. But this one, when you do see it, it tends to go for good money. This is an original, and unfortunately, this is not on Strata. Um, but and Corridor, it just the Woodward Avenue is probably the major avenue in the Detroit area. It's a road that runs all the way from downtown Detroit all the way up into the northern suburbs of Pontiac and beyond. Whenever you think of Detroit, you almost people always say you have to describe it as like a wagon wheel. Everything kind of begins in the downtown area off the river, and then spreads like that. And that's how all the roads are kind of. So a lot of times they travel, northwest or northeast, and it's a little bit confusing to out of towners. But anyway, this is another fantastic record that if you get a chance to hear it, you can listen to it on YouTube, and it's groovy and funky and earthy and everything that you could possibly want from that music. The reissue did come with, should mention that, sorry. It came with this really cool poster. Not that I would ever hang it, I don't think, but it has the Strata label on it. And on the flip side is kind of the story. John Sinclair did the liner notes for it. John Sinclair, MC5, a manager, founder of the White Panther Party, and Detroit revolutionary, did the liner notes. He's also a poet and has done a lot of work in that line. So that's kind of the Woodward organization. There's one other record, a guy who played with Lyman Woodward and played on a lot of Motown recordings too, although largely uncredited. And there's a guy named Dennis Coffey. And I love a lot of these record stores that they have on here like this are long gone. But at one time, Detroit had all kind of record stores, but most of them didn't survive. This album was actually quite a bit of a hit. So Dennis Coffey early on played with Lyman Woodward, and also was hired as kind of the in-house guitar player for Motown. And he's on a lot of uncredited on a lot of recordings, famous recordings for the label, and some of that had to do with a choice that was made by Berry Gordy to not publicly acknowledge this. He paid him well, I guess, and that was good enough for Dennis Coffey to be part of those recordings. In 1970, he did this first solo record, and it actually ended up having a pretty sizable hit on it called Scorpio. And in fact, Dennis Coffey is one of the few white artists to be featured on Soul Train. If you're familiar with the Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon show that used to be here in Detroit, everybody watched it. It was called Soul Train, and And it was kind of a dance show back when they used to have like dancers and they would play songs and they would have people come and perform. It was always lip sung. Very, very seldom did they ever have a real live performance. But they used to get all the big acts. And, uh, and Dennis Coffey did Scorpio. A lot of rap artists and DJs have sampled Scorpio, and it's a terrific track if you haven't heard it. Um, and this album is worth getting. It's guitar orientated. Uh, Dennis was a guitar player, and so but it's got lots of groove and lots of funk. Although it goes in a lot of other directions too. It doesn't just stick to that. And Dennis, I think, was trying to show some of his diversity on this record. Um, but the Scorpio track alone is worth hearing. If you don't take anything else from this, go on YouTube and listen to Scorpio. It's a great track. Anyway, kind of thought this fit in a little bit with that, and it's just an area I wanted to cover real quickly. I know you don't hear too much about these records or some of the background from where they came from, and that whole scene that bubbled up right in the midst of a time when Detroit needed a shot of the arm, a shot in the arm, and unfortunately nobody was coming to the rescue, and nobody did ever come to the rescue. And even though people thought that business would begin to rebuild, we're just now in 2023 beginning to see that flourish again. So all those years from 1975, and really you could take it back to the riots in 68. So anyway, thanks, and we'll see you later.